Welcome, everybody, to another episode of Strife's Sanctum podcast. My name is Citizen Strife, and as you can see by the bumper title there, this might be one of my favorite ones to do. Because every time I do a Final Fantasy 1, I always think, I have no idea how long I'm going to talk for, because I can talk forever about the early Final Fantasy games. Well, this is probably one of the ones I know the most about, in and out, as wonky as it can be sometimes. And for a time, was actually my favorite until Final Fantasy X. While I was playing it, I just kind of decided, yeah, I like this one a little better, though there are reasons. But I specifically wanted to do this one off the cuff, because normally when I'm doing primers, especially for stuff, I like to at least have a general skeleton of an idea to talk about to keep me on track. I'm not doing it for this one, because this one's special. So if I trail on or off, it's because of love. I remember Final Fantasy 4, Final Fantasy 2 for America. I played at my brother's friend's house. I played like the Watery Pass or part of it, and I knew it. Of all things, Final Fantasy 6, my first experience was a couple years later. Same thing, my brother's friends had it, and they were at the Tower of Fanatics. I surely didn't win, but I played it, and I've known about Final Fantasy. Final Fantasy 7 was the first one that my brother and I completed. We also did Final Fantasy 8. After that, Final Fantasy 5 and Final Fantasy 6 were put on the PlayStation, and that was my first experience with 5 and 6. Now, those versions are very rough to watch and play now because of the load times and the translations and the things like that. But at the time, I was so absorbed in Final Fantasy VI, it was lovely. And I'd went back and forth kind of between whether I liked 7 or 6 more. Like, 7 was the one that really hooked me into Final Fantasy, and then ended up hooking me into JRPGs going forward at that point. But 6 was just better to play, better experience, and it lasted that way forever. So I'd always kind of just had this, Final Fantasy 6 is great, Final Fantasy 6 is great, Final Fantasy 6 is great. And anytime I would replay it or re-experience it or anything like that, like, I would just get this awash of emotion. Like, if I would listen to Darkness and Starlight, until the Pixel remaster, when they finally voiced it in English, like, I would listen to Japanese voiced versions. I would listen to metal versions. I would listen to the Dancing Mad covers, all that stuff, and then eventually randomizers, and then playing Final Fantasy VI. That was my choice for the first game on my channel, and I might go back and play the Pixel remaster. I never thought that I would need to, right? Because the Pixel remaster, like, it's great and all, but I have that first one because I played Final Fantasy VII in my first run of YouTube games. But Final Fantasy VI, when I came back about a year later and specifically focused on YouTube rather than Twitch, I chose that to be the first game. And it's still there. I think it's 7 years now, give or take. But it's one of those things, one of those experiences where I can just see it, and I know it's that game. Or I can hear a song and know where it's from. Or I remember pieces of dialogue word for word at this point. It's one of those special experiences you cannot replicate. So there's always a game like that for somebody. And yeah, I have other ones like Persona 3 and obviously Final Fantasy 7 and 10, but 6 has always kind of just been that one that stuck with me. And a lot of it has to do with the way that they advanced from 4 to 5 to 6. Because realistically, the gameplay of 6 is not really that great when you consider the other two games that they had. And even, I would say, Final Fantasy VII, like, at least offers you a better version of that sort of gameplay. But that's not why I like Final Fantasy VI. I like it because of certain characters and a lot of moments. Final Fantasy VI was the first game, like, even with 4, it was the first game that had character moments. Final Fantasy VI was the first one that made them matter so much. The Cyan moments, the Terra moments, the Celeste ones. The Celeste ones specifically are the ones I'm going to be talking about a lot, because Celeste is up there with Rydia's like favorite characters ever sort of situation. So when I talk about, say, the opera scene, that's why. Stuff like that is what puts Final Fantasy VI above so many other games. Is what that was able to do. Because the more I dig into randos and the more I watch other people play them, the more I'm like, yeah, Final Fantasy VI is kind of shoddily designed, and it's got a lot of bugs in it. It's got a lot of customization, but the customization is very wonky. And coming off of Final Fantasy V, which is so tightly designed in terms of, yeah, you can customize a ton of things, but each thing is a lot more thoroughly based in classes. This one, not so much, because the battle system is, we've taken those jobs and we've given them into relics, or we've given them into abilities. But then we also allow you to do Esper stuff, and anybody can use any magic ever. Same with materia. I'm one of those people that doesn't like doing classes when you're not giving me actual strict classes. I end up doing what is obvious. I just be like, okay, I'll just give you Ultima. I'll just give you every spell. I'll just do this. And then you end up with characters that don't feel different. They get limit breaks. They get skills. Right? And that was my problem with 7 and 8, was that nobody felt distinct. And it took me until Final Fantasy IX where I was like, oh, I'm forced to think about this character differently and plan my party differently, rather than, oh, I got my best stuff, let's just go. A self-imposed challenge. I mean, I've done like no magic runs other than Terra, Celeste, Realm, and Strago, right? Because they're innately magic-based characters. But unless I do that, or unless I make it a class-based thing where you only are allowed to do this magic for this person to this thing, you're not going to get the differentiation with the characters and stuff. I think what masks it most of the time is that physical abilities and the dances and the whatevers are so viable that like no strategy is a failure. Because sometimes you play Final Fantasy V and you're like, well, yeah, I like this class, but it's really not that great. Or it really has its limitations or something like that. There's really no limitations to anything you can do in 6, because this is like the first game where you're just like, yeah, this is pretty easy. Easy-ish, right? There are still some hard bosses, but by and large, it's like the teeth were cut out of Final Fantasy for a while. Because the early Final Fantasy games were rough. And after 5, a lot of the crazy bullshit, like damage floors or ticking poison damage, other weird bullshit, they were left by the wayside. And replaying those games, Final Fantasy VI is the first one where I tend not to die a bunch, if at all. But getting to the battles, it's very quick. It's very snappy. It's very fun to see the animations, because, like, watching Edgar use the fucking chainsaw and the drill never gets old. It gets old if he constantly uses instant death shit on people to avoid instant death, but, you know, then he'll just do the spinny chainsaw, and it's great, because it's a lot of damage. Or learning, like, oh, I can use this mechanic to do a lot of damage, or I can use Valiant Knife to keep my HP low, but I do a shit ton of damage, or I do fixed dice. Like, randomizing stuff is great. You know, learning all of the crazy nuances of what the battles can do, or like testing out Gao or Mog's crazy randomness and hoping and praying that they do great, because I like using them because they're so broken, and I don't want to spend a lot of time on Gao because his mechanics are so varied that it warrants kind of its own video someday if I ever get around to it, because you need a goddamn list. It's like trying to do the chemist job and trying to do every single mix, every single place. Like, no, it would drive me up the wall. So there are like 5 or 6 that I use, and then there's other ones I just like, I remember you, I'll use it, it's fine. But then you have the situation in battles where, as great as some characters are, there's others, at least in the original, I don't know about the Pixel remaster, but Cyan, waiting for his stuff, it's terrible. Like, I get the allure of changing everybody's skill set, but missing a blitz, or taking forever to load Cyan's thing, or, you know, mistiming a runic for Celeste in a very pivotal moment, those become very problematic. As opposed to just using Terra and using Morph and just saying, hey, I have double damage now, fuck you. And of course, I don't use Steel. If I ever find myself stealing anything, I don't bother. Unless it's a seed where I've specifically said I have to steal everything from every monster, I don't use Thieves. So Lock just doesn't cut it. So you have this situation where certain people's abilities are so varied and so vast that it's like, well, they're just better choices. Or you have a Realm situation, I'll get to Realm later when I talk about characters, where it's like, their stat base is just better, and if you manipulate the espers to give you the stat bonuses every level, it's a bit fiddly, but you definitely benefit more from that. The other main issue with the battles is a lot of bugs persist. So the Vanish Doom or X-Zone trick, you know, casting Vanish on a boss and then being like, you're dead. So you can bypass a boss. It's nice that it's there, you know. But the fact that it exists at all is sad. You have just a lot of stuff not working, like blindness. Blindness doesn't do shit in this game. Evasion doesn't work, so magic evasion is what matters. If you get 128 evasion, you basically avoid every damage thing ever. Right, so you just suffer a lot of just weirdness. Those glitches just exist. Now, again, these have been changed, but I'm strictly talking Super Nintendo and the PS1 version, so that's based on. So between certain characters just obviously feeling like, now when I play, I care more about whether I like the character rather than how they play, but knowing that I play them more in randos now, it's like I have to care about how they play, and if they don't play very well, and it's just you know, some of the abilities are worse than others. Like, I'm not going to use Setzer. God, no. I suck at the slots, and they don't really work great. The GP Rain does not work like it did in 5, so why the fuck would I ever use it? Jumping is freaking bonkers if you've got the right weapons for it, you know. Or the randomness of Mog and Gal, again, so good, but it's spotty. It's very spotty, and I've done that, where I've had them be my healers, or I've had them be my damage dealers, and they're spotty, you know? Or I just use Cat Scratch, and I do 4x damage because an early game enemy has the best thing in the game. Shit like that, you know? Or you use Umaro for funsies, and you just have him just run into things, and stab things, and throw things, you know, if you want the simplicity. But the benefit of the system, despite my criticisms of it, is while it lacks in sophistication, it makes up for in some customization. Not the intricate customization of a battle and a job system, but the freedom like in 7, where, okay, this don't work, I can work around it. That is one of the main issues you have in something like a 4 or a 9, is you're kind of stuck with a character setup, a job. You don't have abilities. The most you can do is level up or change a person's abilities or setups and loadouts and work around it, or change the party member to suit the need, So, but at the same time, if you're given everything to do, you're just going to be like, all right, I got Ultima. I don't need anything else but Ultima, so forget it. Or I've got Bum Rush now. I don't need anything else. Or I just have the highest damage, So that's where the battles frustrate me. But only because I've played it so much. If this is a first-time playthrough, there is no optimal way to play, because I think that's the benefit that 6, 7, and 8 have, is that you are given so many options that do seem viable. 8 to a lesser extent, because limit breaks, physical limit breaks, are so much better than magic, and magic is inherently weird. But still, you're allowed to, if you just want to use summon skills and kill things, you can. I watched a guy do it and get pretty far, just doing summons. He buffed up the summon damage and went there. So even if the characters themselves in battle aren't any different, the ability to just be like, all right, I want to use that person, I want to use that person, I want to use it. There is something special about not feeling so beholden to a job class that you're stuck. And they only have certain things they can do. You can turn anyone into anything and make it work. So there is something easier about it. That having said all that, Final Fantasy 6 is not good because of the battles. I like them, but I was always into the music, the look, the characters, and story. And that's where the majority of the time is going to be. I may not spend a lot of time on every character because, admittedly, most of them are kind of, and that's one of the criticisms you can levy on 6, is a lot of characters don't get time. But the ones that do are really good, or are really fleshed out. And I think that's something that is in its favor. This was the first one where you didn't really have a main character. Yes, Terra is kind of the poster child, and I'm grateful for that, because, female representation in games goes back that far, and it's very limited, especially in RPGs, and other than Yuno or Lightning, you don't have female-led Final Fantasy games. So having Terra and Celeste as kind of the main two is nice. But there is no main character, because I'd say there's 2 or 3 options if you so choose. Or there's some that get good screen time while, a good 5 or 6 or 7 don't. There's the drawback there. It also doesn't have the issue of hey, we killed off all these people because we needed to do this. No, they finally figured out how to allow you to choose what characters you wanted in so many different parts of the game. The splitting paths in 4 or 5 different instances, either base defending or attacking, or the final areas where they have split character dungeons, where you're actually okay, I have these characters I haven't been using forever. All right, so I can give them extra weapons, and now they have to help fight with my main dudes down Kefka's tower. That's kind of neat. Or fighting through Phoenix Cave, or fighting with the main party and then using the Moo charm with the other ones and then having them bounce around. Those are cool things. being able to split the party and not having them just up and die if you want them to leave the game, because that's what 4 and 5 did. Well, 4 sort of did. Nobody really died except one, but it's nice that they don't have to force it, because in 2 and 4, whenever they wanted to get rid of characters, they were like, oh, 4 is drama, I knew you. Like, I replayed 3 recently, like 2 and 3 recently, and it was forced as fuck, because they hadn't figured out what they finally figured out in 6, and they went for other games after, the ability to choose party members whenever you want. Because at the time, with 2 through 5, they were basically like, oh no, death scene. And then you look at the death scene and you're like, well, that sucked. Or they did the convoy thing in 3 where they're like, oh no, this person I knew for 5 minutes and half a dungeon is dead now. No. And you're just like, well, I have no emotional investment on you. I was there for a dungeon. Like, I don't know anything about you. Like, okay. At least with 6 and 7, like 5, 6, and 7, you know, to a lesser extent 4, I guess. You're just like, all right, well, there's other people I can add in my party now, but it just felt like, we need this person in the party now, put him in there, but we gotta get, you know, Kane has to do the betrayal scenes. Like, it's stupid, right? At least with 6, you never have that. If you have somebody leaving the party, it's something like Tara, who goes through an emotional problem. You know, a lot of her scenes are solitude and loneliness and trying to understand her place in the world. So her going batshit nuts and tearing shit up makes sense, because, oh, she's not in the party anymore. Okay, there's an emotional reason to invest in to why she's not there anymore. There's an emotional reason why Celeste wouldn't be in the party. Shadow, at least he gives you the, oh yeah, I'm a mercenary, fuck you. You paid me, I'm done, I'm gone. That makes sense. Splitting the party, saying, okay, we're going this way, we're doing that way, we're going that way. They give you reasons to not use certain party members. And then, when you get to the end game, which is another reason why 6 works great, then it's there. The ability to have everyone and choose everything if you want them, because you don't have to. I think they said you only need 3 characters in the final part of the game. Everybody else is optional. That's huge. To be able to just be like, oh, I can find everybody at my own pace and my own time and do. Again, another episode I probably have to do myself is like World of Ruin, and discuss the mechanics of those side questing. Not how it exists, because that's part of this video, but why it's effective and in a change of pace sort of way as a final stretch of the game. But again, all of those things coalesce, and all of the characters coalesce. And I do want to kind of go in like descending order of importance of characters and go from there, why these 5 or 6 hold the game and then the rest of them don't, because that's where the majority of this video is going to be. But we'll start with Tara. And Tara, I'll get to Kefka in a minute, but I'll save him for last. But let's get the main characters out of the way. Tara's whole thing is she was born half human, half Esper. Espers have crazy magic power. So the Empire wants to use it to their own advantage, finds her in the Esper world in an admittedly super quick scene. Like, I always laugh at how quickly an Esper, Madwin, finds Madonna and is like, well, nobody will ever love me. And he's like, why don't we try for ourselves and find out? And they just fall for each other at like first sight. Like, that's kind of random. And then, oh no, a baby. Okay. So yeah, I obviously I'm gonna have the spoiler warning on this video, so I haven't put that up yet as the warning, but whatever. I'm sure you know if I'm talking about Final Fantasy VI, I'm talking about in very, very minute detail as best I can. But Terra exists. She gets stolen away by Gestalt, who looks like a dog for some weird reason, like an old emperor dog. And she gets experimented on, fries a bunch of random mook soldiers, and has to live with the guilt of having lived alone for like 20 some years as this killing machine and this test subject. And all the stuff that the Empire is able to do, they do because she exists. And you get these scenes where she's alone and she's different because she's half human, half Esper, doesn't really know her place in the world. Locke has his own reasons for protecting her, other than just being a charge and being like, we'll help her because he can help us fight the Empire. No, he ends up being like, okay, I have my own personal reasons for helping you. And, sort of helping, but not really falling for her or whatever. Her whole thing is like finding love because she doesn't really know what love is, and meeting people and trying to learn things. And the General Leo scene at near Thamaza, where she's like, I don't know what love is, am I ever gonna find it? And you get these goofy scenes with Edgar and Locke. They're doing a piss poor job of explaining it, but Leo puts it in these really poignant terms where just because I'm on the opposite side of things doesn't mean that we're not allies sometimes. And Leo is an interesting case of that, and he's like, well, I understand. I've lived through a lot of shit. And I still remember one of his scenes was, you throw your life away, I have to be the one to tell your parents or tell your loved ones you died in battle. If it's a meaningless battle, I don't want you throwing your life away. That's powerful stuff. So having him be the one to explain to Terra that love in many forms exists if you're able to. I would have loved to see Terra and Leo, find common ground and maybe even get together in a sort of weird way, because it's one of those rare interactions. She ends up finding love in a different way. It wasn't romantic. It was more motherly and protecting orphans from the light of judgment, right? But she finds it. Her refusal to fight and whatever ends up being a very slow slow process at first, and then you come back and say, I can fight again. It's funny. I'm like, again, it was a really short, like, I suck. No, I don't suck. Let's fight. Let's go. Because they had to. But Terra's whole thing is using her powers because they're so strong, doubling her magic power. It is an insane skill set. What's also insane is that she and Celeste can learn natural magic. She uses fire, Celeste uses ice. And so they innately get magic, but they also can use basically any equipment set that they want, except for rods and staves and shit. So they get pretty much their pick of the best weaponry and best armor. So if you just want them to be physical attackers, they can still do it. So it's like they're red mages. It always kind of struck me as like, why not just use them all the time? They have some of the best magic power in the game, in a game where like anybody can use whatever magic ever. And then if you still need them to use physical attacks, like they're viable physical attackers. It's almost broken how good they are. The only real difference is that Terra has a much better ability. Celeste's is more defensive and useful in spots, but for pure damage, Terra beats her pants, hands down. I was going to say pants down. I'm like, they don't wear pants. But anyway, but Terra is kind of the central core of the game, and she gets a lot of good scenes, especially early and late. But then you contrast that to Celeste, who is my favorite character. And I would say until Rydia, in Final Fantasy IV, like her early scenes and then Return, like Rydia just blew me away. Celeste is right up there. And as much as I love other franchises and stuff like Persona and whatever, and even other stuff like Final Fantasy and let's say Yuna and this person and this person and this person are great, Celeste is just so good, so well defined as a character. And a lot of her scenes reflect on Locke, so I'll throw in Locke here as well as kind of those secondary mains right next to Terra. So it's like those three are kind of the main characters if you choose. And Celeste's whole thing is, I'm not an opera floozy, I'm a general, But she gets put in these goofy situations, and you realize, like, she's as alone as Terra is. Terra's capture led to Celeste's experimentation into a Magitech Knight. So she ended up basically becoming a Terra clone in a way. And she was a general. And she got fed up with it and was branded a traitor. Locke had already explained that I'm going to protect someone. I'm going to, he goes out of his way to protect Terra early on. You mostly just think of it because Terra has amnesia and doesn't know what she's doing, or Locke is part of the Returners and he's doing... No, he ends up explaining for Celeste, specifically, that he was friendly / romantically involved with someone known as Rachel in Kolingen, right? And Rachel goes with Locke on an adventure because he doesn't think anything of it. She falls down a broken bridge and she basically loses her memory, and then she passes away later. Or sort of passes away, doesn't pass away. Like, he tries to bring her spirit back, and his whole thing at the end game is to bring Phoenix back. And that is an emotional scene, is seeing them kind of reunite for at most 30 seconds to a minute, and Rachel basically saying, don't fawn over me anymore because I can't exist anymore. I can't have you guilt-ridden over me, because I loved you, sort of thing. And it was, but then going into what ends up with Terra and Celeste, his guilt over his actions forces him to overprotect them sometimes, or to whatnot, and it ends up being platonic for Terra. But this was one of those early instances where, like, building a love story for characters. This was one of the first ones I'd seen, because I'd seen Tifa and Cloud, or Aerith and Cloud, and I always thought that was fun. A love triangle, goofy love triangle kind of thing. But I always felt that because Cecil and Rosa and 4, like, they're already together, so there's a love story there, but a lot of the chemistry stuff, they've already built it. You don't need to think about it. Locke and Celeste falling for each other goes through these roller coaster emotions that I think, stuff like Final Fantasy VIII fails to do because there's not chemistry. Or Final Fantasy IX sort of does, but, Zidane and Garnet are a bit goofy. I'd say Tidus and Yuna do very well because they like each other. It always came across like Locke and Celeste kind of do like each other, or try to like each other, because they're trying to share each other's pain and loneliness. Because Locke has the guilt. Celeste doesn't believe that anyone can love her, or at least hasn't experienced it. Not in the same way Terra does. But she's unsure that she can be trusted, and she keeps thinking that Locke is slowly developing feelings, and they like each other, and they do. And the opera scene where they like Locke doesn't think anything of Celeste other than, okay, I'm protecting her. But then he sees her and she's like, oh God, I think I actually do like her, in an attractive sort of way, in a goofy sort of way. But she's confronting the feelings in the opera scene. I just want to talk about the fucking opera scene. It's great. Taking this character who's this hard-nosed Beatrix-esque person is like, I'm not an opera floozy, and then she just goes and sings a freaking opera. Part of the reason the opera scene works, and some people don't like it because it takes away your control and is just a set piece. And the amount of skill it probably took Uematsu and the people in the gameplay side to come up with an opera in multiple formats, make parts of it interactive, weave in and out of, the opera itself, then go back to character control, then fight a boss while you're trying to do a timed segment, and then finishing off with, admittedly goofy, easy boss, seafood soup, right? But weaving that sort of set piece in and out without it feeling like a cutscene was great. And even in the Pixel Remaster, where it is pretty much a full-on cutscene at this point, you did not have that sort of thing in games. Even the early version where it's like, whoa, it's not actually voiced. But now, 20 years later, it is. Or 30 years, excuse me. 30 years later, it's voiced. But you always had that vibe where the opera scene, like, they did everything they could. They tried to make it operatic. Sometimes you had dance numbers. Sometimes you had operatic scenes. You never had full-on 20 to 30-minute set pieces. And then before games became very cutscene heavy and FMV heavy and stuff like that, this is one of those times. One of the only other times that would be rivaled would have been something like Lufia 2, where Lufia 2 had a montage scene. But even that was like 5 or 10 minutes of just some random cutscenes. You don't have this like interactive 20 or 30 minute set piece with this crazy intricate music and all these moving parts to it and pulling it off. And admittedly a goofy setup, just to make Celeste play the fool so that Setzer can be introduced. But what it ends up doing as an opera is telling you that Celeste is trying to confront the idea that Locke is using her as a replacement because he knows about Rachel. He told her about it in the extra scene. One of the things that you can find out about Locke if you choose. But then you go to that, and then you go to the Magiteca research facility, then you learn about that, then Celeste leaves again, trying to do that. And then the scene in Albrook where she doesn't even want to talk to him. And then she wants to talk to him again, but Locke is just like, no. They go through these subtle bits and spurts of like fighting each other, and even Tara is just looking at him and going, what the fuck is wrong with you? Like, she knows that something's up with them because even she can see that they like each other. And then Locke apologizes, and then after that shit hits the fan, and then Celeste basically is just distraught. But it's Locke's bandana of all things. I think it's out of, I don't think he intentionally understood. I don't think he knew, but it just kind of happened that way, that Celeste found an artifact of his and forged her reason. And again, that was an alternate situation, but the majority of the situation is you leave Sid to die, and then she just goes full on distraught, tries to commit suicide, doesn't succeed and thankfully finds her way to search for friends. And then she ends up becoming the main lead for the rest of the game because she's the first one you find. And what I've always found with Celeste was she takes over when Terra doesn't. When Terra is in the lead role, she's in the lead role, and Celeste is in the background or missing. Whenever Terra's gone, Celeste tends to take the lead role, and then vice versa. So Terra's gone midway through the game. Celeste is the one you control, and I've always felt that like they kind of co-lead the game, right? But I always like respond and resonate with Celeste is more just because of that romance aspect with Locke. And those three kind of center as the main leads. So that's what I find is impressive. Just the sheer amount that they go through with those three. And then it goes from there, and then there's other ones that do. Edgar and Sabin, they have an interesting story. And I like Sabin's arc, but they don't change much. They don't really have to, because a lot of the other three do. But Edgar is this very sleazy and honestly not very effective womanizing person, but he protects his kingdom of Figaro. So any faults I have with him being very bad at flirting with people, much like Zidane later in the series, he makes up for it by wielding a giant fucking chainsaw for 1,500 to 2,000 damage, or being able to submerge a city in a desert so that they don't get beaten up, or being able to be like, okay, I can work through machinery and stuff. Like, he doesn't seem like a king that doesn't do his job, right? He protects his people, and it's great. And he also has those moments where it's like, I can't take money from the king. He's like, just shut up. I'll pay you. Just take it. And they give him a half-off discount, but it's like, it's still, he will pay his subjects to render services, stuff like that. It's fun. And you get the Sabin part, where Sabin is this suplex, the train suplexing bear of monk fame. And it's like, great, yeah, he can do all the cool blitz techniques. And, the blitz stuff is tough because of a lot of the circular movements and corner movements. But, then you have the suplexing of the train, or you pull off the fire dance or the bum rush, and it's great. And it's like, okay, it's worth doing. Which is weird because a lot of those are actually magic based, which is really stupid because he's geared towards physical attacks. Don't ask me why. It's one of those weird glitches. But Sabin is great because he takes the Imperial stuff and he gets into the Cyan and Shadow and Gao introduction phases, and he's like, I'm a bit of a musclehead. I do this thing. I will beat a deer. He's very straightforward. And I'm like, I'm not a complete dumbass, but I just like to punch things. I'm good at punching things. Let's fucking go. Let's scram. He's able to like see things and be like, okay, I'm my own person. I'm my own man. You have Edgar taking subterfuge and flirtations and initiative covertly, and then you have Sabin on the other side who's just like, I can be covert, but I like to punch things. I like to suplex things. I like to tear shit up. So you need that balance. And you have the little moment of Sabin not really accepting his family's position and their death, and Edgar kind of understanding and being like, I can hold and carry that weight. And then finding out he just throws a double-sided coin and being like, I let you find your freedom because I'm going to carry it. I will carry it because I think I'm better at it. I want you to have your own choices as the younger one, and they always seem to protect each other, and it's great. but they're also able to like see their own faults, like Sabin and Locke putting around and just saying that Edgar's bad at flirting with people because he doesn't stop and he's incorrigible. Shit like that's fun. The best character other than Celeste, Terra, and Locke in terms of characterization though is Cyan. Cyan goes through probably one of the more intense opening arcs I've seen other than Rydia. And seeing his family poisoned and killed in front of him and just really like not accepting it, finding out later that the pain he suffers translates later to him kind of living a lie and trying to find how to describe it. Same way that Locke is replacing Rachel with Celeste in a way until he doesn't. Like he's trying to replace his family with this, this grieving woman who is trying to write letters to this wounded soldier who ends up dying. He ends up taking that role because he's looking for companionship too, and having to realize that this is not right, this is wrong, I've been living a lie. At least he does it himself, because he realizes he's living that lie for so long and sending these flowers in this person's name just to think, this isn't right. At least he gets that. And then later on, he realizes that his guilt over the death of people, it's not really his fault, but, monsters and whatever take over his dreams and whatnot. And then he fights and he's like, yeah, I can do this, I'm gonna live and all that. That's great. But those early scenes of Cyan seeing Kafka poisoning Doma is just, it's affecting. Because you have this goofy scene in this monster phantom train, but you're just like, then you see his family. You see his wife and child being like, well, we're dead now. There's nothing you can do. So you can't come with us. You have to live and remember us. Those were affecting. And you have to remember, I was 9 when this game came out. I was like 14 or 15 when I saw this stuff for the first time. Part of the reason these things affect me even to this day is like how mature they are, but how immature I was when I first saw them. But it's like, my God, it's just so good. And then you have Gal. Let's just get to the characters that don't mean much. Because after Cyan, you're just like, everybody kind of is meaningless. Like Gao is a feral boy. He does feral boy things, but you realize that he was left out in the wild from his dad, but his dad doesn't even recognize it because he went cuckoo. Whether it was dementia or just the world basically going nuts. I think it was dementia, but his scene, like Gao, like, you want to root for the kid to find his family, but it's a goofy way they go about it, and you don't even have to do it, really. Like, you dress him up in this nice outfit, and then you realize that he can't even reunite with his father anyway because of his father's condition, so it just seems kind of pointless. Or Gao's introduction is just, hey, you give me meat, I want meat, Mr. Thou, right? And you're just, it's all goofy. But then you realize, like, his skill set, his rages are so, like, free-flowing and crazy. Like, he can do this move, he can do that move, he can do this. He can do 255 different moves, or 100 different versions of attack for extra damage, but then have every spell in the game if you choose the right one, right? So the versatility's there as long as you can put up with the fact that he's random as shit. And again, it's so crazy I have to think about it later and do it in its own form. But as a character, There's not much to go. He's a boy. He's a feral boy because his dad when his dad got ill and whatever it happens. Shadow, Realm, and Strago kind of need to be fit into their separate thing. Like, you get introduced to Shadow and he doesn't really think about things, and he has his moments where he'll talk about himself, but only if you search for it. Context clues fill you in that he's Realm's father, but only so much. And he doesn't really explain it, right? He's a dude with a dog, and he's a mercenary. He's got one of the best dogs in the game, in the franchise, an Interceptor. And Interceptor is great in battle. And he can throw stuff, and he can dodge stuff, and he can whatever. But Shadow doesn't get much talking because he doesn't care. I'm Shadow. I'm a mercenary. I won't garrote you, right? But then every so often, if you go to an inn, sometimes you'll get one of 4 scenes in succession, and you have to search them out because they are random. Like, it's like a 25%, if that, chance to trigger the dream sequence that'll tell you he's basically like Realm's father. I forget why he goes on the sabbatical and going on the journey. I think it's because he's on the run, or his friend and whatever, they were bandits and whatever, and they try to settle down and they don't, and then he just realizes, well, whatever, it's not worth it, but you kind of figure out that Strago and Realm and whatever are related to him, but they don't, like, he keeps his distance. So it's one of those, like, you have to search it out to learn about it. And it's nice and all, but Shadow himself is so weird that it's like, there could have been more if they'd wanted to, but they didn't. It's enough, I would say. Strago's fine. His characterization's fine. He's the guy who tells you about the warring triad statues and what Kefka and Gestalt are after. So he fills you in on that stuff. The burning house and the whatever. He tells you we are the magi. We're the mages. We have to fill in the gap of, we had magic, but we gave it up because we wanted to be in hiding. Because that's smart. What bugs me though is Realm, and it's such an oddly specific thing, and it's a stat thing, and I've always brought this up, and it's always been weird, and I don't know if anybody's ever noticed it. And I think I only notice it because I've played this game so much. But I will reference it because I don't like Realm a lot. And I think it's a me thing. But it also has something to do why I don't like Aiko from Final Fantasy IX, right? I don't like bratty kids. I'm not a kids person, if you couldn't tell. I work at a kid's store, of all things, but I'm not a kids person. I saw what my brother went through raising kids, and I'm like, I don't want that shit. But kid characters can and sometimes are effective, like Rydia. Rydia is great, or Pearl Faye, or Marlene. But you'll notice that if I've ever played a game with a kid character, there are certain ones I don't like, and there are certain ones I do. Palom and Porum from Final Fantasy IV. Which ones do I like? I like Porum. I hate Palom's guts because he's a fucking dickhead and he's an asshole. I think you're starting to see where I'm going with this. Realm is a bit of a fuddy-duddy, in her own words. She's a rambunctious little bitch, and Aiko way worse, right? But still, it's like, I don't like brat. I think the brattiness can be endearing if you're a teenager, if you don't go too far. Like a Yuffie brat is a bit different and more playful than I'm a 10-year-old. I'm a bit of a dick, or I'm a 6-year-old. Like, just I think they overdo it, right? And they overdo the bratty stuff. And again, it's likability. Not every character is meant to be likable, right? And I guess if I just want to be part of the party, and Strago says, no, I just want, and to an extent, Realm is, rambunctious and like willing to do whatever, but she comes off as, for what scene she has, she comes off as, I'm my own girl. I can do whatever I want to do. This is great. I can join the party. It's great. So in that sense, yeah, if you like that sort of person, that's cool, And normally I do. I tend to like people that have a lot of... When I gravitate to characters, I gravitate to people that have their own drive and initiative and motivations, rather than the, I'm so scared, this is bad. But when it comes to kids, right? I don't like the fact that kid characters are usually considered OP as shit and are fighting with the party. That's why I've never really liked Ken, despite Ken in Persona 3 having an interesting backstory sometimes. But involving him with the rest of the group does seem a bit forced, like forced drama. And again, I think he's a little older than Realm, but it's still in the same vein. It's like he's bratty, sort of. He's bratty adjacent, where I'm just like, it gets old. I don't need you to be saying, oh, I could do this. I'm totally capable. And there's a line between I can do everything you can do versus I'm better than you. This is perfect. This is great. You're just dumb, right? So I think it's just a tolerance level. It's a tolerance issue. And another thing that is going to be kind of stupid, but I'll bring this up because I'm talking about Realm, is, she joins the party. She's a stay-at-home artist. That's all she really does. And maybe Strago trained her. I don't know. I don't think she's trained, but from all the context clues we've been given, she cares about art. But she is the highest magic stat in the game. And it's always bugged the shit out of me. It's a very oddly specific thing that bugs the shit out of me, but bear with me and I want to explain it. Terra and Celeste. Terra's half-human Esper hybrid. Celeste was trained at practically child soldier age with Terra's inherent augmentation abilities, right? And they've spent like 20 years, give or take, 20, 25 years being trained by an empire to murder things. Celeste was legitimately a general until she left, but she has soldier training. Terra has innate magical powers that are beyond human comprehension. 10-year-old girl, part-time artist, whether she's trained off camera or not, higher magic stat. I fucking hate that. It's an oddly specific, stupid thing, but I hate it. So that's another point against Realm that I don't like. Because it goes all against the nature versus nurture thing. And yes, I get it. Genetics and whatnot is cool. But in an oddly specific set of circumstances, I'm like, I can buy the fact that Terra and Celeste are magic users because of the way their story is. I can't buy that Realm could fight her way out of a paper bag. And yet she has the highest magic stat because she was born that way? That's fucking dumb. That's like saying I can, like, I'm the best actor in the world because I sit in front of a microphone. Because I sit in front of a microphone. And I'm like, because my parents were voice actors or whatever. But I've never done it in my life. But I'm better than somebody who's been trained at it for 20 or 30 years, went to freaking acting school. Stuff like that. Saying that Wayne Gretzky or LeBron James, that's like saying like LeBron James's kids are great athletes because they're LeBron James's kids. Which, whether they are or not, you still have to train. You still have to actually put in effort, you know. Again, really oddly specific thing, and maybe just because I'm a sports person, I tend to go onto the nurture versus nature thing. But my God, you have to nurture a skill. I'm sorry. You don't just pick up a thing and immediately are the best. I'm sorry. That just does not happen. So Realm fucking sucks in so many different ways. And yet in a randomizer, she's one of the best characters because her high magic stat innately is great. Whatever. I'm off my soapbox. It's done. Anyway, other characters like Setzer, he exists. I like his story, but there's so little of it. And it doesn't help that his skill set sucks. The slot and GP reign are just you know. I like that he can use darts and fixed dice. They're interesting, but you know, other than his World of Ruin stuff, he's not all that interesting. But it's more interesting because of his relationship with Daryl than anything else. Because it's one of the effective scenes in the World of Ruin, and I love the music involved. But he as a character, there's not much to him. Mog, he dances. He's a Moogle. He's funny. But that's all there is to him. Umaro, he's a berserker. He's a Yeti. He's funny because he's a fucker. But he's there to fill out a role. Gogo, you find them in the middle of a random ass dungeon that you'd only know if you were to go there. You know, oh yeah, let's go to this island to get eaten by this monster rather than kill it because you're ever supposed to know that that's supposed to happen. You have to seek them out, you know. And then you end up finding out that Gogo, their stats are terrible. But the benefit is they can mimic and they can do pretty much anything in the game. But they're worse than anybody else. So it's kind of like a Kimari situation. Why would you ever use Gogo other than the versatility? You know, stuff like that. So a lot of the characters at the end of the game are just there to fill out roles that existed in other jobs in Final Fantasy. And that is one of the main criticisms of 6, is other than the first 6 characters, there's not a lot of story for the rest of them to go by. Which really sucks because you have 14 or so characters to choose from, but a lot of them are just jobs or abilities. So if you like them, it's great, but I gravitate towards the character stuff a lot. Speaking of character, I've waited long enough. Kefka. I will say this much. I don't think Kefka is the best Final Fantasy villain I've ever seen. I think I put Arden at number 1, Kuja at number 2, and Kefka at 3. And then Sephiroth at 4 and whatnot. Exdeath actually at 5, for surprising reasons. But bear that in mind. I'm not saying I hate Kefka as a character. I'm saying that I don't really think he stands the test of time as much as the myth of Kefka does. Kind of in the same way that Luca from Suikoden 2, now that I finally played it, he's very effective and it's cool in an interesting way. Kefka's interesting because he is actually successful. And he's weird, but he's not really all that interesting other than being a Joker ripoff. Right? And maybe that's just personal preference. Because again, I think compared to anyone else early in the franchise, he's the best. But Kuja's as effective. But even with the weird, effeminate weirdness that Kuja shows, he at least has a character arc that, brother, inferiority complex, and I don't want to die, and I just go insane. And even some of the stuff later with Kuja doesn't add up. But he ends up being effective despite the way he looks and the way he acts and the things like that. And I think he is also like, he doesn't overdo it. I think Kefka tends to overdo it in every scene he is, because he's trying to reinforce the nihilism and the chaos. And I get that. But chaos for chaos's sake has never really interested me, other than the fact that he's successful. Arden is successful because he's successful in everything he does while coming off as a smarmy, self-absorbed, fabulously dressed prick who owns and chews scenery because he knows he can. You know? And again, that's the benefit of voice acting. That's the benefit of the English voice actor. I would say presentation. I think a lot of it has to do with presentation of Kefka, Kuja, and Arden. I think the theatrical nature of Kuja masks all of the like actual effectiveness of all the shit he does. Like if you go to Final Fantasy IX, he's actually super fucking effective. Arden is effective in what he does in more of a mindfuck sort of way, but he's an ever-present threat, as is Kefka, and I think that's what the benefit Kefka does is he's an ever-present threat. I'm not taking that away. What I take away from Kefka, though, is he is very one-dimensional, right? I'm not saying he's not effective. What I'm saying is, despite being the ever-present threat and the chaotic mess and the successful threat that he ends up presenting, he doesn't really cut an imposing figure. The gesture stuff kind of drags it for me because it's hard to really do that effectively without the visual splendor. If Kefka was introduced the way, say, Heath Ledger's Joker or Mark Hamill's Joker was, with the characterization, like Dave Wittenberg did his voice in Dissidia, and I was really impressed by the way he did that voice. If that was my first introduction, like if it was fully voiced, like if they ever do a full-on remake of Kefka, like his goofiness will be in full display. You know, the goofy natures and the craziness. Like, he is such a visual intrigue that you need his voice for it to be effective. Kuja can sort of get away with it because he's effeminate and theatrical and whatever, but still, like, you sense the threat throughout the game because it's constant. Kefka, like, he succeeds, and then after a while you're just like, okay, it's all Kefka's doing, and he succeeds and he wins, but then he's gone for like half the game and he's no longer the threat. You know, he's there for like the early part, the middle part of the game, and those are great scenes. The poisoning of Doma and Thamaza specifically, and then of course his eventual succession. But unless you are really, really into the chaos and the nihilism that he presents, I don't think he as a person is this be-all, end-all character of Doom. And I think, you know, you want a balance of indomitable threat, right? That looks the part of a threat. But you also want the chaotic weirdness of Kefka to actually believe that, yeah, he's dangerous as shit and can do anything he wants. Kefka doesn't look like a threatening villain. You know, to be fair, neither does Kuja. So, there's a disconnect. So, the narrative effectiveness of Kefka as a character and as a threat contrasted with the fact that he's a putz. The fact that he's just a fucking weirdo, you know, and played for comedy most of the time. counteracts the effectiveness he has in the overall scheme of things, because eventually you don't want to be liking the villain, right? And that's the same thing sometimes the Joker has. The problem is he's too funny that his effectiveness as a villain lowers his impact, because you're like, why do I care? So the effective scenes he does get, I'd say that's the difference between him and a Sephiroth or an Arden, is that they have enough cold, emotionless, narrative dissonance from the plot that they are myth makers. They do their damage, but they revel in it only enough that it doesn't veer into suspension of disbelief. And I hope that that's kind of where I'm getting at as to why I'm ranking Kefka lower, in that you want a balance point between you look the part of what you're trying to portray. And yes, Kefka does look the part of a putz who gains power because he's an emotionally ravaged and deranged person who suddenly gets it and just revels in it. That's effective. But as an overall package, I don't look at Kefka as a threat. Ever. Other than the fact that he's successful. Right? Because there are many different ways you can look like a threat, but the more you look, the more you're just kind of... It's kind of the Seymour thing, where they built him up as a threat, but the more you look at him, he's more just kind of there, you know? And it's a bit disappointing because you're just like, okay, he's effective, but nothing he does is really shown, sort of. So like all the stuff that Kefka does is shown, but he doesn't look threatening at all. He's just a fucking dumb fuck. He's crazy as all shit, but I don't ever think he hurts me. As opposed to Luca, who's crazy, but he's a trained soldier. Right? And he's got a sword. And he stabs people, and he poisons people, and he hurts people. Like, he's a physically imposing guy. Kefka just doesn't. So there's a balance. So, as effective as Kefka is, there is that kind of... So, again, this is sort of the same situation with Realm, where it's the more you see of it, the more you question it. As you're first seeing him, maybe it doesn't come across. And I think that's just weighing him versus competition. In a vacuum, I still think Kefka is very effective. But there's that. I don't know how much more, but I do want to at least get to the music and then the World of Ruin. So let's get the World of Ruin out of the way. Getting to Kefka's thing, being effective, and succeeding in destroying everything. And yeah, his final boss form is kind of neat and all, but it's more of the culmination of doing everything rather than him himself. But the statues are cool as a framing device, but it does kind of come out of nowhere. The statues of God and whatever, like, wouldn't anybody else know about the statues too? It might seem like Strago's the only one who does know. It does seem kind of strange that he's the one who does know. Maybe it's a hidden thing. I don't know. You would think Terra would also know about the statues. But at the same time, they go to the floating continent. Kefka rips all the shit apart. Celeste has to bring them together. So the World of Ruin exists. A whole separate half of the game. Because at that point, like, Final Fantasy started to be the 20-25 hour game instead of the 10-hour games they were early in the NES era. It did feel that, like, everything was kind of approaching normalcy, and I think that's what they were going for with 6, was the normal. Fight an empire, fight some guys, do the things, and then Kefka comes around tears your shit up, and then finally succeeds in his role as the ultimate bad guy. But what's also effective is you see the effect that the Light of Judgment and the Goddess statues had. On this day, the world changed forever. The world freaking died. That's why something like Dragon Quest XI also succeeds too, until they chicken up. But that's a story for another day. If you know, you know. But the World of Ruin exists to give Celeste a chance to reclaim characters. So as a party, you're picking up the pieces of what was lost. And Celeste goes around and finds Sabin, finds Edgar, finds Setzer, finds this person and that person. It was 4 characters, I think. So it was Celeste, Edgar, Sabin. Celeste, Sabin, Edgar. Actually, no. I don't think you have to find Sabin. I think you can find him. But I think Edgar, technically, you do find first. But then you go find... I always find Sabin first because he's the quickest to find, so I always lump him in there. But whatever, regardless, you find those 4, but then you get the airship, and then you search for friends, and the music is great, and I'll talk about that later. But that's where you go and find Locke, Terra, Gogo, Umaro, Cyan, Gao in different places and doing different things in different dungeons. And you can go in any order. They do kind of tier the enemies in different spots so that you should go to certain places beforehand. You know, and then there's other places that are just random, you know. But a lot of things. And a lot of cool ideas at play. The Tower of Phonetics, where you can only use magic. Or the Phoenix Cave, where you're 2 parties and you split the party. And then you go into Kefka's Tower, and now it's 3. Going to the Ancient's Castle and learning about Odin and the Queen. You know, stuff like that. Or going back to the Opera House and seeing a dragon just fuck shit up. Cool stuff at play. Minor areas, minor things, you know, going to Jador and going to the Magic House. There's a lot of ideas at play because it's set pieces. Following along with some of the set pieces in, you know, the early game, like Leet River or splitting the party or going to Vector and getting through the mine cart level or, you know, the Phantom Train level. You know, there's a lot of set pieces in 6, and they're not always well designed. Some of them are annoying, like the Zone Eater. You know, how are you supposed to know to do the Zone Eater thing unless they tell you in game? I'm guessing that they tell you in an NPC, but unless you look at a guide, I don't know if you'll ever know to do it, right? But the Zone Eater has the unkillable guardsman, and then you fall off, or then you have the area where you have the killer floor that if you don't save and you die, then you have to redo it, and it's a pain in the, you know, shit like that. But there's enough cool stuff around this area that it's like, okay, I love doing all of these. I love learning all of these. And I have kind of a specific order I tend to go in because I like going to find Mog first because he has the Moogle charm. And I'm like, as soon as I can get the Moogle charm, I don't have to fight anything anymore. Yay! You know, or you can go to the Colosseum and get Marble Shoes and Minerva or any god number of cool items, you know. You're powering up, but then you're also doing things like finishing stories. You're learning about Terra's new motherly protection of orphaned children, or you're going to learn about Setzer's friendly rivalry with Daryl, you know. Little things that you don't have to do, but they flesh out the game so well. And yeah, it's very spotty. I will say that, like, Final Fantasy VI is very scattershot. It isn't point to point to point to point at the end there. It's a lot of go and do whatever you want. But because the early game in the World of Balance is so traditional, you're allowed to experiment more with 6 in World of Ruin. You know, same to a lesser extent as Final Fantasy V. Final Fantasy V does the same thing with side questing stuff like the Phoenix Tower and whatever, but it's a lot less. Like, you need to get the tablets and you need to do the things. There's not as much side questing. 6 is kind of the first game where you're like, okay, there's a lot of things to do, a lot of characters to find, a lot of skills to find, a lot of espers to find, a lot of new weapons and armor to find, stuff like that. It's the first game to really kind of expand its scope. And the fact that the World of Ruin is so messed up gives you a backdrop of this world is fucked even if we bring it back to normal, right? If they beat Kefka, like, they leave it as, well, the world's still fucked, but the evil's gone, right? They don't just repair it back to normal like nothing happened, because some games do that. They take the evil and it's gone and it's back to normal like nothing happened. No. As far as I can tell, when the ending happens, you know, it's kind of like Breath of Fire 3 in the same way. Like, you beat the final boss and you're just like, no, it's still kind of shit, you know? Was this the best thing? You know, we got rid of the evil, you know, but Breath of Fire 3 is a more nuanced case. Kefka, like, kill Kefka because he's an asshole, you know? But at no point does it ever say that the World of Ruin just reverts back to the World of Balance, you know? So the effect that Kefka had on the narrative is always going to be present. So that's what I like about the game, is that it is 2 parts and they're vastly different. The last thing I want to talk about is the music, because there's so much good music in 6. Uematsu really outdid himself, and it's not even close. The sheer amount of good songs here is on display. Like, I think 4, 9, 7 to an extent are almost as good. Or, you know, there are like, maybe there are better songs like Battle on a Big Bridge, One Wicked Angel, you know, Man with a Machine Gun, stuff like that. Spotty here and there, but I think, like, in terms of overall, like, everything here is good and it's varied. You know, Final Fantasy 9 is up there in terms of varied good stuff. You know, 6 is up there though, and a lot of it has to do with the tone that they get, the tone that he's able to achieve. Because this is later in the life cycle of not Final Fantasy, but Super Nintendo. Because I remember Final Fantasy IV, very bassy, very straightforward, better than 3 because you had the drums and you had new instrumentations you can use, and you had stuff like Four Fiends and, you know, the Red Wings theme and stuff like that, and the final, you know, the boss themes. I think the boss themes in 4 are like the best, other than 7, because 7 is just such a driving metal kind of thing. But the 2 or 3 boss themes in 4 are great. 5 suffers because it's very trumpety and higher pitched and a little goofy in times, like the Harvest song. I get what they're going for, but it does seem like, for all the cool stuff is in there, it's a lot of like brass instrumentation and very bright sounding, and it doesn't have a lot of oomph to the good stuff. Or it's few and far between, like Big Bridge and the X-Death stuff. So it's kind of like, well, I like it, but it really needed the Pixel remaster to really sound like, ooh, this shit's really good. 6 doesn't really have that problem. It's kind of like mixed very well in between those two extremes, where it's bassy enough, but it's also got a high enough pitch when it needs to that it's like everything kind of fits. And there's so many good songs in display. Talking about set pieces, Terra's theme, heading to Narsh, or having it as the overworld theme. Having, protecting the Espers. Not my favorite, but still, like, whenever you need a set piece or a battle thing, or you're escaping, use that theme. Celeste's stuff in the opera, Cyan's theme. So much good stuff. The decisive battle, the battle theme. Or Mount Cult having, like, this very distinctive, almost heavy metal sounding thing in the backdrop, like the like almost like a chainsaw metal guitar, like in the backing, because I'm a metal guy. That's the stuff I like. I like hearing that stuff as the backing track. The Epitaph song with Setzer talking about Daryl, one of my favorite subdued themes. There's so many good, just random songs. One of the other ones that I want to mention is kind of the main overworld theme, this very dour Day After. And I'm not talking about Searching for Friends, which is also good as an overworld theme in World of Ruin. I'm talking about the town themes, because the Day After, everybody's kind of huddled in this, like, despair, and the songs change because the traditional town theme of being high-pitched and happy and carefree, or very very homey and subdued and just carefree, is displaced with this very uncertain, morose, just like mid minor pitch of this like lone guitar or lone keyboard here and there, and then they layer it here and there to add more, but it only lasts like a minute or a minute and a half. Or the other parts, if you go to Narsh, or if you go to the overworld theme before the Searching for Friends, you get this haunting melody. Like the intro theme alone is part of Dancing Mad, and I haven't even gotten to Dancing Mad yet. Jesus fucking Christ. Like, you can tell I'm struggling to just jot down all of these damn songs because there's so many. Like, the Moogle theme is the best Moogle theme. Mog's theme is very high-pitched. The Prelude theme is very orchestral, but has a nice flute intro. It's just Dancing Mad. The part of Dancing Mad opening the game, telling you that this is not a happy-go-lucky Final Fantasy game anymore. This is kind of a downer Final Fantasy. And then Dancing Mad itself going through these emotions, kind of like these spurts, like the opera theme, going through different sections, like the amount of sections that it does, and the sheer artistry of Uematsu's keyboard work, and then just hitting big with the end of Dancing Mad at the end there, being like, we're in the fight now. It's so fucking good. There's so much stuff to like. And it almost never lets up. I mean, there are a couple of dumb themes, like the like the what the fuck music. That's just a bunch of like, whoop whoop, stuff like that. Not great. But by and large, it's just a lot of good music. And it's something I always go back to. And I love about Final Fantasy VI is just the sheer amount of good songs. Final Fantasy VII also had a sheer amount of good songs. The hit rate that Uematsu had in terms of different sounding music and different types and genres, but all making it worthwhile and snappy, that you go, I heard that song, I remember exactly what that spot in the game is. It's like not just one or two songs, like 10, 15 songs that I'm remembering right off the top of my head. Just always with me. Final Fantasy VI is so good. And if anything, for the last almost hour and a half, because that's kind of what I was expecting. And if you weren't expecting me to gab on about Final Fantasy VI for this long, I don't know, but it's so good, And I don't know how I can end this other than to say, like, even if I'd say like 10 has a better story or plot or character vibe or presentation because of the enhancements in voice acting and the cutscenes and the storytelling, there's still something about 6. Characterization, the music, the story. And yes, even if I had issues with Kefka presentation-wise, execution, absolutely strong. And sorry for the burp there. But so much goes into Final Fantasy VI that even with its faults, it is still considered one of the best games, not just of the franchise, but of the system it came out in, of all time. It lives up to that hype. Not everybody thinks that it's the best game ever, nor should they. Everybody has their opinion on what they think. But this is almost always brought up. If not number 1, it's number 2 or 3. A lot of people can just sit there and go, okay, I understand why this has the hype surrounding it. There's so much stuff to like. Is it the most tightly designed game ever? No, not from a battle system standpoint. God, no. But from characterization, like if you overcome the fact that half of the characters don't get any characters at all, the ones that do overcome it to such an extent that you forget that it matters. The stuff that they're able to do in an old, like near the midway point of like video gaming, like the middle age of video gaming, like near the end of the early era. You go from what Final Fantasy was in 1, 2, 3, and then you just see the expansion, what they do character-wise and emotion. Final Fantasy VI is emotion. The characters grab you, for better or worse. The set pieces grab you. The music, the battles grab you. Everything, even if it's not the most tightly designed game, the reason why I'd say Final Fantasy VI and Final Fantasy X are my favorites is because they grab you by emotion and character work. So I think that's what I'm going to remember most, is that I'm always going to remember and think, this is what I remember when I was 14, 15 years old, 20, 25 years later, 30 some years later, until I'm older. I'm going to remember playing this game for the first time and still like feeling emotion for this game. And maybe it's a different game for you, but that's fine. As long as a game speaks to you in that way, or a franchise, even like what you can say about Final Fantasy as a franchise now, if one of those games makes you feel the way I feel for like Final Fantasy 6, 7, 9, or 10, like whatever, you are a happier person, and that's all I can ask for. But hopefully I was able to say, like, hopefully I was able to at least convey my love for this franchise and my love for this game in some way. Because would I recommend Final Fantasy VI? Gee, I wonder what I would say. If I hadn't spent an hour and a half gushing about it, I don't know. Maybe I do. But again, just for a reference point, would I recommend Final Fantasy VI? If you want characters, yes. If you want emotion, yes. If you want good music, yes. If you want customization and battle, maybe not. Maybe you'll find a different Final Fantasy game that fits a little better, like a 5, or even a more traditional experience like a 4 or a 9, where you're just like, they are this and they are only this, this is kind of a weird halfway point between all the customization in the world, but not really, because it's too much customization and everybody looks the same. That's a drawback. Some of the characters are just abilities in character form. You know, Kefka isn't as great as everybody says he is, but he's still fucking amazing, right? You know, I'm willing to say that Final Fantasy VI isn't perfect. Some of the shit doesn't work. A lot of the in-game bugs and shit doesn't work. You know, a lot of the characters and their abilities don't fucking work. You know, and some of the stuff is a bit hackneyed or over dramatic and whatnot. But even then, the stuff that does work works so well that if you're engaged in like a certain mentality, like character first, story first, whatever, this is such a good freaking game. But that's just my opinion. I could be wrong. Hello, Dennis Miller. Anyway, I haven't referenced that in forever. Anyway, speaking of finishing it, I've been at this for an hour and a half. I'm going to need to take a break, and maybe I'll get to a Danganronpa episode later or not. I'll just work out. I don't fucking know. Anyway, Final Fantasy 6. We did it. Lee and I are probably going to do the Apothecary Diaries review some other time. Let's just say we can't do it right now. Put it off. We'll get to it eventually. But I'm going to do Ameku MD Doctor Detective in its place. This is one of the shows, I think, last year or a year or 2 years ago that I really liked, and I'll just talk about that next episode. East Origin, Be the Beginning, Mega Man 5 and X5, and then at some point, I'll talk to Lee again. We are probably going to do more stuff together. It's just a matter of, like, you know, busy schedules and other bullshit kind of being like, we'll do it. It's fine. But for right now, I will call it because it's been a long episode. One of my longer ones. But I will see you guys next time. Citizen Strife, signing off.